Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Leader, co-founder and CEO of All In Together, and I am thrilled to be here today with two of my friends and fellow political junkies, Amy Dacey, the director of the Sine Institute for Politics at American University and former CEO of the DNC, which she will talk about, and the wonderful Katie Walsh Shields, who is the senior data advisor for the Republican National Committee. And we have done, this is our third time doing an All In Together program together. The ones that we did in the 2016 election were really some of my favorite conversations that I've had since the founding of our organization. And so I am so excited to be talking with you two right smack in the middle of the conventions, the newly imagined conventions. So I thought I would just start by asking both of you just to say a little bit about yourself and your history with the conventions, because both of you have had a truly front row seat to history for many conventions. So maybe I'll start with you, Amy.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for having both of us. I always love seeing Katie, which I don't get to very often during a busy election season. And thank you for the work that you're doing with All In Together. It's fantastic. I have had a lot of different iterations at conventions. My first one was in '96 in Chicago, where I literally was a volunteer and basically was checking people's IDs at the front door. And I'll never forget literally trying to explain to Governor Dukakis that even though he didn't have his driver's license, I was going to let him into the convention, so that was my first experience, at the conventions. But I have, been at Emily's List and run programming because, a lot of times people don't realize outside groups do programming, at these conventions. I've certainly been at the different committees when, we were trying to put programming in and get our candidates, in front of a lot of people and party leaders there. And then when I was CEO of the DNC, I led the site selection committee where we went out and looked at all the cities that were bidding and brought in a team of experts to figure out, which one was going to meet the criteria. And then I sat across the, table from Mayor Nutter and others and did the contract negotiation, the master contract negotiation for the Philadelphia Convention. So it's interesting to go from checking IDs, in '96 to actually helping to put together and then, being a speaker at a lot of the programs in the 2016.
Yeah, and we're going to have to talk about this venue piece of it because obviously in this new virtual world, it's, we're losing one part of the convention experience, which is this connection to these fabulous cities and communities around the country and the ways in which convention highlights amazing communities. But Katie, over to you. So you also have a long history with Republican conventions.
I do. Well, my first convention was actually 2004. Like Amy, I was a volunteer. I mean, I was in college in 2004. And so I went up to New York and
you're so young.
Experienced the 2004 convention, which, from a Republican's perspective is kind of still the convention that we all think back to and think, wow, that was, we love that convention. But in 2008, I was on the nominees team. I worked for John McCain in '08. So I kind of saw it from a candidate perspective. And then in 2012, I actually worked for the Senate committee, Republican Senate committee. And so I saw it from a kind of Senate perspective, and they kind of, if you're not the nominee, but you're a Republican office holder, what is your role at convention? How do we utilize you? What opportunities are there for you to get your message out and for people to understand what you're about? And then in 2016, I was RNC chief of staff. And so I was in charge of kind of making sure everything ran the right way from the committee perspective. So I've seen it kind of from the candidate perspective, from somewhat of an outside perspective, and then from the committee, which is ultimately responsible for making sure everything works.
So let's start with the basics, which is sort of the why do we have convention and what is it supposed to do? I mean, obviously it's changed so much over the years because there was a time during which the delegates really were choosing the nominee during the convention. Now that's not really the case. We come to convention mostly knowing it's been a very long time since we've had a brokered convention or weren't clear who the nominee was going into the convention. So what is really the point? What are we, what are the parties doing at convention? And how different is it between the Republican convention and the Democrat convention in terms of what they're doing? Maybe Katie, you start.
Sure. So I think one of the reasons, or one of the many reasons that we have conventions, I should say, is it kind of, I think, launches the fall campaign, right? And it's kind of like a starting point for which we believe that we're going to start having a dialogue and show a contrast between our candidate and the other candidate, or the opposite party's candidate. And I think one of the very cool things about that is it creates an opportunity for you to really, outside of the news media in an unfiltered way, present your platform and your vision for America for the next 4 years and show what your candidate is about. And so it's an opportunity to really speak directly to a voter for the first time in the general election. And in a lot of times, it's the kind of the first time that the public writ large is really paying attention to what's coming up in November. And so it's a great opportunity for a whole host of things. But I think the thing that, you know, as a Republican, we find most helpful is the ability to directly speak to the American public, you know, for 3 or 4 for 4 nights, prime time, and lay out our vision for America.
Yeah, and Amy, that's very similar, obviously, for the Democrats as well.
Absolutely. I think both Republicans and Democrats, like, party conventions are party meetings. Like, that's how they started out. This media circle aspect really was developed over time. They used to be very much, you know, just contained party meetings where, you're right, they were brokering, trying to figure out. Over the years, the transparency has just been, you know, through
Right.
the natural, you know, opening up of social media, of, you know, but it's always been, you know, just a party meeting with 2 functions. You nominate your candidate for the national election, and you also confirm your party platform. So those were always the 2 basic core pieces of business that you had to get done. Now there's other organizing aspects. Caucuses and councils meet, outside groups talk about the issues that they care about and their affinity to, you know, what you're doing. You highlight other candidates. But the other thing that's important, in some years, these conventions also are a way to, and then also bring your party back after what could be a divisive primary, which is where you have several candidates who are, you know, debating why they're the best nominee, but then you can show the, you know, the party, and then certainly people outwardly, that you're unified and ready to move forward. But it is that next, to Kate, like Katie said, that next phase of the election where you can put out what your values are, what your message is, what you want people to know, and it's when people are paying attention. So, but it started out and always has been a party meeting. So
Speaking of party, oh, sorry, Katie, go ahead.
I was gonna say, Amy, I don't know if your rules, if the Democrat Party's rules work the same as ours, but the other thing that we do at our every 4 years, it's really the only opportunity to change the party's nominating rules. And so if we want the nominating process to work differently in the future, it's our only opportunity, according to our rules, to pass something like that in what we call rules committee, because it needs, you know, it needs a vote of the full rules committee. And so that's the only time that they get together, and it's the only time that that our bylaws will allow us to change that. And that's really important as we continue to talk about, you know, our Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina can continue to be the first primary states, or how do we allocate delegates and so forth. And so that's another thing that kind of doesn't get shown on television, but for the organizers and for the party leaders, it's a really important meeting every 4 years that we're orchestrating.
And to your point, Katie, a little bit of a difference, because a lot of times Democrats, we do commissions after, you know, the national election, where we go back and look at rules and there's changes. But a lot of times what you've seen is after every 4-year cycle, there's a commission that's put together to reevaluate and look at some of these things. Unity Commission, I think it was called after the last one. Like, these are ones where people come together and the rules are reevaluated before you start going through the rules committee process of putting together state plans, putting together calendars.
For those of us that are like real junkies on this stuff, the question of what's going to happen with Iowa definitely looms large. That was the last thing I got to go to before quarantine, and the last dinner that I had in Des Moines, I was at a table with the Iowa head of the Democratic Party, who's said, quote unquote, "We're completely prepared for everything." Famous last words. So anyway, a conversation I will never forget. So, but back to the party piece, let's talk about the delegates for a second, because I think most Americans don't actually even really know, like, who are the delegates and kind of where do they come from and who comes to conventions. So can you talk a little bit about how delegates are selected and, you know, what their role is? And obviously we'll talk about how that's different this year because it's mostly virtual, but I don't know, Amy, what about on the Democratic side? How do we select delegates?
I think the big thing is that delegates, there's different types too. And I think that people sometimes don't realize there's pledged delegates, there's, you know, at-large pledged delegates. But basically what happens is they're elected to then show what the sentiment is of the state. So a lot of times they run on a ballot. It depends on the state. Sometimes states it's different, because sometimes in every state, where a lot of times they will run and be a part of the election process in the primary, and so that they move forward. But primarily it's pledged delegates, which are in turn selected through a series of individual state caucuses and primary elections. So they're selected through that process too. That's why a lot of times people don't realize the delegates to the convention aren't solidified till closer to the actual convention, as well. And then pledged delegates are classified into three categories. You have at-large pledged delegates, and are allocated at the statewide level, and then you have which are certainly the largest group, and then you have district pledged delegates that are allocated and elected at the district level. They're usually the congressional district, and then you have PLEOs, or pledged delegates, which are party leaders, elected officials within the state. So all of those combined to, when you saw you see the roll call at the election, the states that then put forth how they're deciding to nominate.
Got it. And that's the same on the Republican side, Katie?
The Republican delegate process, I think, is pretty straightforward. We really nominate our delegates and elect them at the state and local level through the state party and the county parties. And the majority of them are all pledged delegates. We don't really have delegates that come to the convention that are considered at large or non-committed. Once the primary process happens in the states, those delegates are bound delegates according to our rules, and they are bound, at least on the first ballot, to vote for the nominee that their state elected. And so you're really sent as a person that's to represent the state in terms of how they voted. And so that's our delegate process, I think, is a little, I shouldn't say simpler, but just a little different in terms of there's not quite so many different delegates. You're just kind of all the same delegate.
So let's talk about, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
The number's different too, Katie, right? Like
we've got 2,472 delegates.
Yeah, we've got 3,979 total delegates. So
yeah,
that's some real insight. That's some inside baseball. Okay, so let's talk about the convention itself, like on the inside baseball stuff. And obviously, like this year, it's just so different. For people who've never been to a convention, it is normally just like it sounds. Lots of meetings going on. The states are meeting every day. State delegate groups have meetings about their state party issues. You've got the platform stuff. You've got all these outside groups. There's parties. There's music and nights out. It's a whole ecosystem, both in the community and then inside the venue, whether it was the Q in Cleveland or the stadium in Philadelphia. Now we've got all of this virtually. So if you were planning the conventions this year in this virtual environment, what do you think are the most important things if we think about the fact that it is essentially a sort of setup for this last period before election day? From each of your perspectives, like what are the things that you think are most important for the parties to be emphasizing, to be focusing on, and to help people understand about the candidates and where they stand?
Amy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's challenges and benefits actually from this situation that we weren't asked to be, put in. And I'm sure, Katie, like I have total sympathy with you too. This has evolved and been ongoing real time. So the convention that we were having a year ago is not the convention we're having, today. But I think the important part is that you're missing out on the real time, just like it's also a family reunion for some people who go, convention to convention. You get to see people. State parties get to interact with other state parties. They have meetings on best practices. The caucuses and councils meet and they organize around how they're going to do outreach to certain communities. But I think some of the benefits that we've seen is now those meetings are actually accessible to more people. I know the caucuses and councils at the DNC are advertising and saying, please join us, be a part of this. So trying to create that virtual enthusiasm is really important. I think the other piece of it is, you have this ability over the course of, several days to show a lot of individuals. You get to not only show your nominee, but you get to show a lot of up and comers in the party. The big thing is people will vote for what they feel connected to. So showing somebody that looks like them, has their experience, is a really great opportunity to connect them and say that this is, the home. This is that we share your values. And so I think the party's trying to do that and see that. The interesting thing is that's what the party's pushing out and how they're trying to organize and how they're trying to get their message across. it's also interesting to me, you've got the media who used to benefit from walking out, you know, of the CNN grill or walking out of wherever they were doing and just talking to a delegate on the street or getting that. So how are they getting some of the feel and the, you know, talking to people that, you know, are attending these in a way? That's some of the things that I think are missing out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think as we approached how to do the programming for this, it somewhat highlighted a direction we were going to, you know, I think both the Democrats and Republicans would move towards anyway, which is, you know, how do you get more interaction from a virtual standpoint, and how do you make people feel more a part of it that aren't in the room? And so normally we have delegates and we've got a venue that has, you know, thousands of people in it. And so we're focused on them and the viewer at home. And I think when you take the delegates and the participants out of the venue and you just say, look, everyone's seeing this virtually, it forces you to think about more creative ways and different ways to incorporate and include people that are watching virtually, because that's how everyone's watching it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's been really great as a way to a brainstorming and almost like forcing mechanism in a way to make folks feel more included and more a part of it, even if they're sitting on their couch in their living room. And Amy brought up a really good point on coverage. I think the pre-coverage and the post-coverage feels drastically different than it has in years past, not only because normally you're used to the backdrop where you're seeing CNN or Fox or MSNBC with the floor in the background. And so you're getting kind of a live feel of like all these people bustling around, and it's kind of this very chaotic, but in a good way, exciting. This is democracy, you know, at its best. And people are being able to watch the process in real time. And it feels a little, I think, a little more stale. And it's just unfortunately kind of the COVID environment we're living in. So as much as I think it's been somewhat of a helpful forcing mechanism in helping us get people more involved, they're sitting at home. At the same time, I think there just are things that we can't, you know, we can't showcase the same way. And some of that's just because, as Amy said, a reporter can't walk down on the floor and talk to a delegate. And so we're kind of losing that real-time input. But hopefully, you know, in 4 years, we'll get that back.
Yeah, I've been saying it feels like it's gone from being a convention to a commercial. Right? That it is really just sort of 4 days of uninterrupted commercial programming, advertising, the political parties and the perspectives on, you know, the view of the future of the country. So in our last few minutes, so first of all, I have to point out one thing, which I think, you know, is really the hallmark of All In Together. And we've talked about it in events that we've done before. People are always so astonished that we can bring together Democrat and Republican women leaders to talk about anything in this completely polarized time. And I want to just say a word about that, because I know that, you know, Katie and Amy, although they're on different sides of the aisle, have worked really well together for a long time. And we've enjoyed it All In Together facilitating conversations like this, because, you know, our mission is to make sure women understand our political process, that they're participating. And that's something that's really not a partisan issue. So I just wanted to, I hadn't given my shout out to our bipartisan conversation here. One last thing I wanted to just talk about is like your sort of insider, like what is something you wish people knew about conventions that they don't know, because they, you know, someone who hasn't been or doesn't work on these things from the inside. Is there something you wish people understood better about convention or about how the parties nominate, your sort of insider view?
I mean, it's a good question. I think I would break it down into two. The process, like this is a complicated, you know, process, because you have 50 different states, you know, thinking out different ways, you know, when you nominate it, like, even though it's one party, like there's a caucus versus a primary versus the dates versus, you know, the debates and the primaries. There's just so much that goes, you know, into it. And I think that to get a nominee early and to be able to kind of come together and then, you know, share this and have this conversation is really challenging. And it seems like sometimes from the outside, you don't see everything that goes behind it. So I will just give a big shout out, and I know it's on both sides of the aisle. These are tireless, thankless jobs a lot of the time. And just thinking about everybody who has physically put together both these conventions, the Republican and Democratic convention, and you give over a year of your time, and they were building something and have to pivot and move very fast, you know, to do that, I think is challenging. I think, you know, the other thing is that I would just say to people here that there seems sometimes a mystery around the process. If you want to be a delegate, if you want to participate, you should look into it, because, you know, both parties allow opportunities for you to help make the decision for who your nominee is. Voting, top of the line, do it every single time. But you can also try and become county chair. I still believe in, county chairs, delegates, like being a part of that process to help make sure you're getting the candidates that you want for election day.
I love that. And we'll put out, following this, we'll put out some more information about how to look at becoming a delegate. It is complicated because every state has different rules, but we need more women always running for all of these things. So we need more women delegates. So Katie, what about you?
I mean, I really second Amy's two points, which, our folks on the Republican side, especially in Charlotte, I mean, they moved down there 2 years before the convention started, and they have to think through transportation and where's everyone staying. And so I think, these 4 nights of TV show up on people's living room, in their living room, and they don't understand that people have dedicated, as Amy said, 2 years of their lives in a lot of cases to making sure that this goes off in a seamless way. And what that really is people that believe in democracy, right? Those are people that believe in the process, because it's not the sexiest job, right? You're not working for a candidate. You're not out there working for someone on the ground where you're like, vote for, insert candidate name here. You are really helping make sure that democracy happens at its the way it's supposed to happen and the way the American people want it to happen. And so I really always, my hat goes off to the folks that put these things on, because without that, a big piece of how we nominate and run our country, nominate our candidates, run our country, isn't possible. And so, it's a tribute to what we have here in America and how lucky we are.
That's amazing. And I want to just add a sort of word of appreciation for not just all those folks that are working, but also the host committees in those cities. And obviously this year, just sort of unprecedented challenges, both for Milwaukee and Charlotte and also Jacksonville. And just the number of people and all of the businesses and everything else that tried to come together to make these amazing experiences when people come to their city. It's, I really feel for them. I have a family member who runs the events location in Wisconsin. They years and years and years to get the venue selected. And then this time it's not happening in the same way, but hopefully Americans will, when it's a safer time, go visit all of these great cities, Milwaukee and Milwaukee and Charlotte and Jacksonville. So as we wrap, last thoughts on like engaging on social media during the conventions and the role that plays, and then, any final thoughts on what we want people to know as we wrap up.
I mean, I would just say, on www.gop.com, that will list all the ways that you can participate in the convention this year. I think also on donaldjtrump.com, you can find the same links. But I encourage you to go and visit them and look at everything that's going on, because as Amy talked about, there's a ton of programming that happens outside of what you're going to see in primetime television that may speak to something that you care about or you want to know more about, or you may be able to see candidates that maybe you haven't seen before, as Amy said, really new up and comers that may excite you about leaders in the future. And so I encourage you to not just sit down in front of your television and watch the 4 hours or the 3 hours that primetime television puts on, but really look at everything we're putting on, because we're trying to program for everybody. We're trying to make sure everybody feels like they're able to see different things of the party that look like them, that speak to them. And so it's an exciting time where you can really get people involved, even outside of kind of the main speeches that happen every night.
Great. Amy, you get the last word on this?
Yeah, I would just add, and I know Katie will feel the same way on this, like this is a learning moment, these conventions. You get to learn, you're educated about the party and the values and what their candidates share. But I will say this, it's a moment in time. It's what we do when we leave these conventions. You have to not only pledge to vote, you have to have a plan to vote. This is so important. You can watch these conventions and not get involved, but whether you're a Democrat or Republican or an independent, you have to know what the rules are in your community to vote, either absentee, vote by mail, vote in person, polling locations, polling times. Like, don't wait till election day. I mean, people are voting starting in September. It matters. Your voice has to be heard. And so I would just say, use this opportunity for these conventions to learn about your opportunities and who you can support, but then make a plan to vote and execute on it.
Absolutely. And a small plug for the All In Together Action Center at aitogether.org. We have state-by-state voter guides that are up to the minute. including links to every state board of elections and the rules for every state around requesting absentee ballots or voting in person or early voting. So you can make your voting plan by going to aitogether.org. We hope you will. This is definitely going to be an unprecedented set of challenges just for voters to get their votes cast, and because of COVID and everything else. So we all need to make a plan. And I just want to say a huge thank you both to Katie Walsh and Amy Dacey, my good friends and my my professors in all things inside politics. And I'm so grateful to both of you, and we will all be watching very closely. And we'll all be watching closely up to Election Day. So thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for all you're doing at AIT. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye, Amy.
Bye. See you.
Okay, good. Thank you guys. So great.